Hey guys, welcome to Pull the Crown. Today we have a pretty exciting episode. We're going to be doing a head-to-head Rolex versus Tudor. It's going to be a little bit different today because I'm not going to be defending one versus the other. I don't think we should get into it and fight until we pull each other's hair out. I would have an unfair advantage. But I was thinking instead...
Bald.
Yes, haha. Thank you.
Your hair's already out.
I was thinking instead we could just discuss the two brands side by side and give our honest opinions about one versus the other, and then kind of go through it, go through the value retention, the history, different models, whatever, and then end with like a conclusive decision on whether or not we think Tudor is better than Rolex. If you're watching this, you already have some idea that Tudor is the sister company of Rolex. But we would like to very briefly go through the history of the companies. So from my understanding, Rolex was founded in 1905. 20 years later, Hans Wilsdorf trademarked Tudor the name, but only actually released the brand in 1946. Is that accurate?
Yeah, somewhat. So Wilsdorf and Davies came before Rolex, right? So that was in the later 1800s. The two kind of linked up. They came up with a business plan. Hans himself was a German guy who moved to the UK and was a businessman, beyond don't start with me, Chris. Beyond being a watchmaker, right? He was not a watchmaker. He was not heavily involved in the watch industry, but he had a real knack for business. He linked up with Davies. They decided to start a wholesale company, and it was aptly named Wilsdorf and Davies, right? A few days before the breakout of World War I, he trademarked the name Rolex, which was meant to be a name that could be said in almost any language and could just speak to his brand uniquely. You can't get it confused with another brand that was already in existence, and it certainly doesn't. It doesn't match to any item or any sort of industry just by name alone. Right?
There's some lore behind that name too, right?
They say that he was whispered the name by a gypsy in a carriage.
Not a gypsy; it was a genie.
I prefer gypsy. I think there's
a gypsy just peeked her head in his fucking
I've been
carriage?
watching Peaky Blinders, man.
Okay.
There's something about it right now. But you're right. It was a genie. Excuse me. I like the idea behind that story. I think there was a little bit of...
I think it just speaks that him being an amazing marketer,
Exactly. That speaks true to Rolex through and through. Not a watchmaker's brand.
Yeah.
But an incredibly well-run, well-managed, well-marketed business, and that goes back to its founding.
Right.
Tudor was an example of that as well. Hans kind of realized that even at the time, right, in the 1920s, the Great Depression era, this is before World War II, this is when stuff is not going well for the world, right? Post-World War I, I guess the 20s, roaring 20s. No, it was okay, actually. Scratch that. Let's edit that out. I'm wrong. But he did realize
the point is
there was an income disparity between people that could afford the Rolex, which even in today's dollars, the equivalent of spending $1,000 on a watch. Mm-hmm. He realized that already outpriced a big segment of the population. So he wanted to develop a brand that people could spend a few $100 worth in today's dollars on, but could deliver something that almost reached the same standard.
Yeah.
And I think that's true today too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really noteworthy is that, again, speaking to him being just a businessman ahead of his time, he was basically doing the Heinz ketchup, no-name ketchup strategy like years before anyone else was implementing that. So it's like, how can I dominate more market share? Well, you know what? I could also do it by having a second brand.
Just a good businessman.
It's just really brilliant. It's really, really genius. And I just like the whole idea behind creating, the whole luxury idea behind Rolex and saying, well, what can I do now for like the everyday man? Like, can I make something that's way more accessible,
And keep in mind too, that Rolex wasn't really regarded as an ultra luxury watch the same way it is today, right?
No.
Even to the mass populace in the early days, if you said Rolex, it'd say, oh, that's a fine watch.
Right.
But it was held more to the esteem of like Longines, which at the time was a well-regarded watch
100%,
brand.
yeah.
But it wasn't like still a Patek or a Vacheron or Blancpain or any of these old Swiss manufacturers, right? Rolex only moved their headquarters in 1905. It might have been in 1905 they moved to Switzerland from the UK, if not a bit later. So really they were a young brand. They were a new starter in the industry, same as Omega was at the time. The luxury terminology, the luxury valuation by the mass populace only came a bit later for Rolex. So but that's overall history, I guess.
Yeah, that's overall history. Yeah. But just to say, yes, agreed, it was definitely a tool watch at the beginning. but there was still a disparity between Rolex still being slightly higher end and him recognizing that there was room for a more accessible watch, hence the creation of Tudor.
That goes back to our wonderful quartz episode. If anyone wants to fall asleep tonight, go ahead and put that on in the background. But that goes back to that episode where pretty much every watch was a tool watch, right? Because you needed precision. You needed it, right? If you were a doctor, you needed to have a pulsation chronograph to accurately time heartbeats, for example, if you were going to use a watch to do it.
Right.
Or you were, what have you. If you were a professional diver, you needed to have a 100%, professional dive watch.
But he was still making the watches like even more of a tool, no? Because they were like more waterproof and more usable,
100%.
Less high-end finishings and all of that.
The Oyster case was a massive innovation for sure, because it made waterproof cases accessible. They weren't the first people to do it, but they were the first people to do it in such a universally viable, commercially viable way.
Right.
Which basically every watch after its inception in the 20s featured an Oyster case, right? Like they don't produce a watch now that doesn't feature an Oyster case. They all are, right? That clamshell sort of concept to add to at least have 100 meters of water resistance.
Right.
And that's true of Rolex now.
Yeah. So where would you say now Tudor positions itself compared to other watch brands? Like what watch brands do you think Tudor stands beside?
I'd say that Tudor is probably the direct competitor to a brand like maybe Omega. I'd say in that realm. That would probably be the closest competitor. I think that online I see that spoken about.
I agree with that, and I find that kind of interesting because you would think that Omega would be more in line with competing with Rolex.
I think that it's a perception thing. Look, we've done enough videos at this point about comparing Omegas to Rolex. I think that it is fair to say that there are models that Omega produces that can compete with Rolex, but as a whole, just based on perception by the population, value retention, these sorts of ideas and concepts, all that stuff, Tudor is a more direct comparison in a way, right? I mean,
I agree. I feel like in my mind, Tudor more accurately competes with Omega than Omega competes with Rolex in a very strange way. And I feel like Tudor slots in kind of between Omega and like Longines.
Yeah.
I would slot it kind of like right in there.
I agree. I think it comes down to price too, right? If you're looking at a $5,000 budget, the first brands that come to mind are like Omega, Longines, Tudor, obviously as well. So it just kind of it's natural that you would think that. 100%.
Fair enough. Would you think that Tudor would compete with the likes of like Grand Seiko? Would you put that in the same?
I think they're two different animals.
Yeah.
When you start talking about international brands, it's not an apples to apples thing, right? Like Grand Seiko is one of the better Japanese
absolutely the
marks, right?
They bring value in a completely different way.
Very different way.
But I would say, like, do you think? I guess the question becomes: do you think someone shopping in that price range would be cross shopping a Tudor versus a Grand Seiko?
Oh yeah, I have many collectors that would. That will have both in their collection, actively collect both, and in that bracket, in that price point, it's just a natural thing. Yeah, 100%. I think it comes down to price. All these things, it's like we talk about value, and we talk about whatever heritage and all these. Oh, this dial, this whatever. It comes down to price, man. Yeah. Money makes the world go around. Like we both know that, and it's like.
Well, I mean, they're comparable, so. Okay, so you know what? Without going too much on a tangent, let me just ask you directly.
Yeah.
If you found yourself in the market for a watch collection and you had more or less, $3,000 to $5,000 to spend, would you take that money and buy anything besides a Tudor? Would you buy a Grand Seiko over a Tudor?
I would probably buy 100 Invictus.
No, seriously.
Just because what your reaction would yield out of that, and the content.
I'm fucking being serious. Be serious right now.
It's such a tough question, man.
Like right out the gate, gun to your head. You have $3,000 to $5,000 to spend
on a single watch.
On a single watch. What are you gonna go buy?
See, this is like I would literally need the gun to be trained on me for the rest of my life, because the problem with me is if I have $5,000, I'm not buying a single watch and putting all my eggs into one basket. You know what I mean? That's not me. I'll never do that. I need variety. I need to wake up in the morning and say, hey, today I feel like wearing a strap queen. You know, I feel cheeky today. I want to wear a little orange strap. You know,
Can you just answer the question?
But that's true.
Okay, fine. Then I'm going to answer you.
I would space it out.
I'm going to change the question specifically to tailor to you and your strange brain.
Thank you.
Grand Seiko versus Tudor. Which one you buy?
You're killing me, dude.
Just fucking. It's just a quick tangent. Like, we have to get back to the episode.
What am I wearing in this fantasy that you're crafting? Probably Tudor. Day-to-day wear. If it's something that you have to wear every day, that's the answer for me. Is that, look, you're gonna wear a Tudor. Stop with your smirking. But in reality, it's like it's so hard to choose. Just a single watch collection doesn't really exist. You can approximate it, and it
doesn't really exist. Of course, it exists.
Not for me.
Okay, not for you. Yes,
I'm special.
You're a special boy. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
To answer the question for myself, yes, for me it would be a Tudor.
It would be a Tudor. What Tudor specifically?
Which is odd because I owned a Grand Seiko before I ever owned a Tudor. But I feel like now that I've owned both, it would be a Tudor. And if I could only have a one watch collection, it would probably be, and I'm answering this really just like off the cuff. I would love to really reflect on this more. But for now, it would probably be the Black Bay 58 gilt dial that I have. There's just something about the watch. I genuinely love it. I actually enjoy it more than my Submariner. I really do.
I think that you're lying.
I'm not lying. I put my money where my mouth is.
Every video that we have shot.
No, because the video that we shot, I had to borrow my brother's sub because I literally sold my sub to my brother, and now I don't own a sub. Well, actually, that's not true. I have a red sub, but I have a Black Bay 58.
There has not been a watch that I've seen you wear more often than the watch that I'm wearing right now, the model that I'm wearing right now.
No, it's also a lie because the watch that I wear the most is my Dreville, and you know that.
Well, I guess maybe I've just seen you when you want to impress and you rock the Panda.
Correct. When I want to impress, I wear the Panda, yes.
Yeah, you like impressing me then, I guess.
Okay, anyways, let's get back to the episode. So the last point that we could discuss about the history of Tudor is the fact that they dropped off the map for a certain amount of time. If I'm not mistaken, it was in the 80s, right? In the 80s, they dropped out of the US market and they only came back with the Black Bay lineup in 2013, was it?
Yes and no. They were still making watches, right? The big block, the small block. These are all. The Tudor Tiger is a great example of that as well, right? And that was in the 90s, which is a really interesting chrono line that was basically made in collaboration with Tiger Woods.
Right.
I've owned a few of them. I love those. I owned them when they were like not worth what they're worth today. Like they've just been steadily climbing because they are pretty sweet watches.
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually one of the main ways that I paid for my Daytona. Was that I bought a big block chronograph when it was worth nothing as an interim watch for my Daytona, and the thing tripled in value.
Oh, yeah.
Like in a few years. It was ridiculous.
They made tons of different models that kind of faded into obscurity in the 80s and 90s and even in the early 2000s.
But in the 80s and 90s, were those watches available in the US or were they being like smuggled in like contraband?
I'm pretty sure. Well, I'm pretty sure the Tiger was. It's a good question. I'm actually not 100% sure. But
like you would assume if there is a collab with Tiger Woods, that watch is available for sale in the US. So that's where the history for me gets a little bit confusing. There is a period,
though, you're right, where they didn't have an active supply into the States.
Right.
It's a money thing, right? It's like their bread and butter for the brand and you know, for Rolex, just broader Rolex, you know, Hans Willdorf Foundation is Rolex. It's not really Tudor that's the big money maker, and that's indicative of their entire business structure. Right. But you're right in saying that later in the mid 2010s, they did start to revamp the Tudor line and say, hey, we gotta basically almost get back to what Hans did originally, which is the market was going like, ooh, like this, like going crazy on Rolex. And they realized that they actually now needed to chase that market that they were losing after every day. Think about it this way. When you bought your sub in 2019 or 2018, you were telling me you spent 9,000 Canadian on it. Today, if you went to
8,500 actually.
8,500 Canadian. Today, it's almost doubled in walkout price, right?
Right.
And that's in only those few years. Now picture from 2015, let's say, on to today, or 2000 to 2015 for Rolex as a brand. Prices went crazy, man. So it's like they slowly began to push out of that realm. It used to be that the sub was kind of your entry level piece. That was the piece that you could afford. Those were the good old days, I suppose.
Yeah, good old days. I thought of something random earlier and I forgot to ask you until now. You mentioned that Davies fellow. What
Yeah.
the fuck happened to Davies? Like, why doesn't nobody talk about this guy? Did he
think
get bought out early on? Like,
Hans shot him.
No, but
He
seriously,
left him in a hole.
Do you
man.
know?
No, I think his this is just going off deep. This is going into the deep backings of my brain here.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that his usefulness in a wholesale business kind of ran out. Like before that, they were manufacturing watches of their own. They were wholesaling parts.
I feel like this is your politically correct way of saying that he got taken out back and shot in the head.
That's why I started by saying that, right? He was like an old horse, put him down. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Listen,
Those early days, I mean,
I'm so sorry.
He just didn't get the he didn't get the vision. Look at the bunny. Look at the bunny. Mice and Men reference. Yeah, man, that's kind of what happened. But back to Tudor today, I'd say, yeah, the big moves for Tudor. I think it was in 2016. Tudor opened up their factory with Kenissi, which is like the movement manufacturer, which is technically not Tudor, but it is really Tudor. It's managed by Tudor, owned by Wilsdorf Foundation. It's literally adjacent to the Tudor factory. And that's where they really started manufacturing their in-house movements, the MT calibers. The first one to get it was the North Flag, which is a since discontinued line. That was a big push by Tudor to say, hey, we want to not be using ETA movements anymore, Valjoux movements. We want to start doing things in-house, which it was a change from that original history of Tudor at the same time, where back in 26, they also didn't use in-house movements. So first time.
So I have a fun little tangent that we can go on.
Yeah, sure.
What are your thoughts on the logos of the brands? So the crown versus the shield.
Crown versus the shield. Why don't you lead us off? What's your thoughts first?
I actually kind of love it. I think it's they couldn't be more accurate for what the brands stand for and how they complement each other. So I was reading some speculation online that potentially the crown is meant to represent, I mean, of course, there's the whole prestigious aspect of it, trying to be the king and all of that, but there's some fun lore too around the idea of like, you know, there's 5 points on the crown for like 5 fingers on a hand kind of thing, you know, and like stupidity is like that. But I just think that it's so
That's
accurate.
awesome. I just have to say that's great.
In what way?
What does that even have to do with watches at that point?
I don't know. It was something I read online. I was like, all right, whatever. I mean, you wear a watch on your hand. Whatever.
To me, it's like 5 fingers. The crown. Did you realize it has 5 points? Isn't that
I'm just saying,
what? I need a Submariner.
Shut the fuck up. I'm just saying the crown itself is very interesting because of what Rolex has become like representative of. Right?
Yeah.
Rolex has become something that
king.
you like. Exactly. Like you want to feel like a king. It's something you aspire to. You want to feel like a sense of accomplishment. So it's like when you finally are able to wear a crown, so to speak, you've made it, right? So it's like you become the king. But in contrast, Tudor, which now the logo has become the shield, right? Originally it was the rose. And I think around like 1969, they put the rose in the shield and then eventually just dropped the rose entirely.
Yeah.
Now you can find
Except
the
for
rose.
the crown.
Yeah, exactly. Now you can still find like hints to the rose on the crown and stuff like that, which is a really nice touch. But even the shield itself, it's like you might even perceive it as like it's the shield that protects the crown.
I love that.
Right? Like it's very cool. And it's cool to think that, you know, Tudor has taken the place of what Rolex used to be in terms of like it being a tool watch. So if you just look at the lineup now, you'll recognize that the majority of the lineup, Tudor lineup, is mainly based on the Black Bay, right? It's their bestseller. And the vast majority of the watches are heavily brushed. So it's like it became more of like the everyday watch, every man's watch, more of like a warrior's watch, if you will, right? Like it's made to go to war, which actually, speaking of, that's an interesting caveat too, is that like Tudors have been to war. They were worn by military. That's not something that Rolex was ever able to brag about, from my understanding.
Okay, well, you mean officially?
Officially, yeah. Like officially,
Yeah.
Tudor watches were worn by military.
Well, there have been, you know, cases where there were signed Rolexes for like Navy SEALs and stuff like that were done in different branches, but it wasn't like a pure collaboration to that effect of like.
But that might have been more like, hey, you're retired. Here's like a special branded Rolex.
Yeah, that's true. Like,
right? Like
direct
these are actual like
collaboration.
military use watches.
But to speak to like the early history of Rolex, I don't think Rolex would have succeeded the way it did if they weren't so prominent as tool watches, as trench watches in World War One. So it's not to say that there isn't like a rich history there as well, right? Like there is a direct, and I'd say that that's probably more impressive and more than let's say making a certain limited run for, designated towards a specific branch of military. I mean, that Rolex was, used to actually help win the war, right? By allies. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting.
Well, anyways, just to say, as far as logos go, I really feel like the shield is quite a cool logo and one that properly represents the reliability and sturdiness of Tudor. And I also think it's a great way that it represents the understatedness of a Tudor.
I love the analogy that you painted there.
It's just
there's
something,
the Rolex.
yeah, like there's something very humble about a shield, right? Like it's really just not pretentious at all. And I think that's kind of the go-to response when I think about Tudor. It's like a very unpretentious watch in the completely best way.
I'd agree. And I think that's something that I wish Rolex would get back to too. And they don't think of themselves as more than what they are, which is the problem now.
It is. It's a very big problem. We talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just unfortunate because we both agree that it probably won't change anytime soon.
No.
Anyways, I think something fun that, I say fun, I should say you'll have a lot of fun. I'll try not to fall asleep. But if you want, you can give us a little bit of a speech about the movements in the watches.
Before we talk about movements, I think we should talk about value. This is a perfect segue.
Fine.
Wait, but before we talk about value, I think we should mention that we actually have a sponsor. For anyone that's been following the last two videos.
You just fucking forced it in there. Like,
it came up naturally, Chris. You asked me about movements. So I said I thought value should come first before we get nerdy.
All right. Let's talk about value. Go.
Why don't we talk about OVTLYR a little bit?
I think you're being an outlier right now.
I'm not normal, Chris.
You're not normal.
And neither are the returns that you could get using the OVTLYR platform, okay?
Okay, so for those of you guys that are lost, as you could probably tell, we've both sold out. Quite savagely, but to some fine folks over at OVTLYR. And OVTLYR is quite a fantastic trading tool that basically gives you buy and sell signals to help you know what you're doing and navigate the complexities of trading. And the idea is that, well, firstly, these guys are fantastic guys that are genuine fans of our podcast. Chris, their CMO, actually watched our podcast and came up with the idea of collaborating with us, which we find extremely flattering. He's actually quite a cool guy. He wears a Batman too on his YouTube channel, where he basically has a bunch of in-depth videos, not only explaining the tool itself, but just trading in general. So it's a really great
totally free,
source
by the
of
way.
information. Yeah, completely
Which I
free.
think he's crazy for. I'm like, man, the amount of videos that he's published and the amount of usefulness that you can get totally for free without even purchasing anything from the company whatsoever that you can get. It just speaks to the character of the guy.
Exactly.
100%. It
just speaks to the character and the overall company that we genuinely believe in. And we're going to be using that tool to hopefully pay for our watches.
And keep this show going too. I mean, that's the main one, right?
Yeah.
But actually today we did get a sell signal on our tool. So we're on a base plan of an ETF. So we're just tracking the S&P 500. They basically explained it to us in such a nice way where it's like, this is your starter plan. Really what they're saying is you guys are watch idiots. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know anything about this world. This is too much. So we're going to set you up just nice and easy. Just follow the S&P 500, follow the NASDAQ. And today we got a sell signal. This is actually what the tool looks like. No money in, you're not investing directly. We both have our own trading accounts separately on different companies, not related. We have to follow and buy and sell.
Anyways, for all intents and purposes, we're potatoes, but we would like to be outliers and we would like to genuinely make some money. So we're going to be using this tool, and hopefully if you're interested in making some money to pay for your next Rolex, you could check it out too. So if you're interested, there's a link below.
Check it out, guys. And on that note, we were talking about value, or was it movements?
I don't even, let's jump movements.
I think we were talking about movements. Let's talk movements.
Okay, quickly, just run through it.
Okay, so Rolex movements, I'll start baseline.
You know what? Before you put me to sleep, I'm going to start, okay?
No.
I'll tell you what I know, and you could fill in the blanks.
Okay.
Rolex, everything's in-house. Wasn't always the case, right? Once upon a time, they were using the Zenith movement for the Daytona, blah, blah, blah. But now everything's completely in-house, down to their actual alloys, right? What is it called when you smith your own metals? They have like their own foundry. I think that's what it's called. So they literally have their own foundry. They make their own metals. They
have a metallurgy department.
They do everything themselves.
That's true.
Tudor, similar story. Once upon a time was using ETA movements, was it?
Yeah, a mix. They used a lot of different ETA, Valjoux.
But now is also moving towards having pretty much in-house movements.
Pretty much. They still actually use the only in-house, non-in-house movement that they use. Well, maybe they no, I don't. Yeah, I think they're gone totally out of the ETA movements, even in the Royal lines and some of the really inexpensive stuff. No, actually the Royal has an ETA movement. So they still use some ETA movements to keep price really like as far down as possible. But they also use the Breitling B01 movement as well for the Tudor chronograph lines, right? Which is an interesting collaboration. And that goes two ways, by the way. Like the Kenissi factory, that movement house, which is technically not Tudor, but it is Tudor, also supplies movements to Breitling and Chanel and other companies as well. But they are overseen by Tudor as a brand. Rolex...
Well, hold on, wait, back up. If Tudor or Rolex owns Kenissi,
yes,
then wouldn't that technically make the Breitling be using a Tudor movement and not Tudor using a Breitling movement?
Well, no, Tudor's using a Breitling movement because the B01 is produced by Breitling.
Not by Kenissi.
No.
Okay,
the B01 is not a Kenissi movement. But, you spoke about, in-house Rolex, and you're like, Zenith, Daytona. But actually, from the start, Rolex didn't really produce in-house movements. They worked with a company called OVTLYR, which was a movement house in Switzerland. And that existed before Rolex was even founded. They kind of worked out a deal slowly as the brand started to pick up speed, where they kind of rebranded OVTLYR as a Rolex subgroup. And they also gave, the OVTLYR board a seat at Rolex. And they sort of partnered up and worked together. And OVTLYR produced all the movements for Rolex up until 2004, when they were finally bought by Rolex and fully acquired for like $2 billion. So technically speaking, like it was, another thing about Rolex, which not a lot of people know, is it's not one single factory. They have like 5 going on 6 factories now that all produce different parts. And the natural transition of that was that Rolex was essentially a mix and match play. Think about Hans's early days as a wholesaler of parts. So he had, Gay Frères producing the bracelets, producing the First Jubilees, oysters. He had different companies manufacturing cases. He had different companies manufacturing the dials. One good example, which is just kind of a fun little industry thing, and it speaks to how tight the Swiss industry was back in the day, was one of the major dial manufacturers for Rolex for a long time was the Stern brothers. The Stern brothers, you might know, maybe you might, if I say the name Thierry Stern, that might say something to you perhaps. Well, in any case, the Stern family eventually bought Patek Philippe, and they're the current owners of Patek Philippe, and they actually produce dials for Rolex. So like Rolex eventually started buying out a lot of these sub-factories, and that's why they have so many factories all over the place. They bought them out, and they can technically call themselves vertically integrated, even though they were totally independently operated facilities that were just acquired by Rolex, but they're all under the same brand. So technically, according to pure is it in-house or is it not? 2004 was the first time that Rolex was an in-house movement manufacturer because it fully purchased OVTLYR.
Right. So it bought the credibility in a way.
Exactly. Yeah, which is kind of interesting. And does Rolex deserve all this praise as this ultra luxury, unbelievable? Like that's a fact that not a lot of people know, man. If you went around and asked dealers in the industry, that sort of thing, they have no clue.
That's interesting
modern stuff. Yeah.
So technically they're in-house, but they kind of like bought their way to it.
In a way, yeah.
That's a very Rolex thing to do, but whatever.
That's the Rolex way, man.
So let's naturally now, organically, without you forcing it in, talk about value and value retention.
Sure.
So I found something that was quite interesting. Okay, so the average. So this is very hard information to find, by the way, because I thought it would be very easy to find, but it's really difficult to find the exact retail price of a Rolex in 1946. Okay, it's very difficult to find.
Yeah, 46 is a tough one.
46. Sure. Okay, I chose 46 because I was trying to find exactly at a time where Rolex and Tudor existed side by side and were being sold what a watch would sell for. So even despite my intense research, I wasn't able to find like exact MSRPs, but I was able to find like approximations for what these watches sold for. So in 1946, a Rolex sold for about $150 US, the equivalent today of about $2,300. Okay. A Tudor sold for exactly half of that at $75 US, or the equivalent of about $1,100 US today. Today, in 2025, a Rolex Submariner is about like $10,700 retail, about $15,000 on the gray market. A Tudor Black Bay 58 is about $4,500 retail. So still roughly half the price 80 years later.
Yeah.
So I thought that was extremely interesting, because basically what it says is that the business model that they came up with 80 years ago is still being respected today. Today, you go out and you will roughly spend half the price acquiring your Tudor than you would spend buying a Rolex.
And here's my biggest problem with Tudor. This is where it loses points for me, is that fact that it has to be half the price, it's a limiter. It has to be half the price. In a way, it can't be 99% of the watch for half the price, right? So in my view, Tudor makes sure that they don't fulfill what the client really wants out of, let's say, a Black Bay.
They hold the brand back.
Exactly. Like biggest thing about, like, say, like a Black Bay 58 is maybe what? What would you say is if you could like change anything about it and make it better on your Black Bay 58?
The bracelet.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think the bracelet for sure. The clasp. I think the new one's
So the new
better.
clasps,
the new clasp is better, but on my specific.
But by the way,
Black Bay.
they do have a micro adjustable clasp, but it's like
and even like
way worse.
The
than
bezel, right? The bezel click, not as satisfying, not as grippy.
Do you know how easy it would be to make those small fixes?
Yeah.
Do you know how
100%.
easy it would be, with Tudor, the billions of dollars that they generate on their own,
Right.
That they could manufacture an in-house chrono movement or even modify the BO1 in such a way to make it a smaller case? Like, they know what people like and don't like about their models. And they know that they could easily tweak them to make them better and really fulfill that client's desire. But then why would anyone go up to a sub? Why would anyone go up to a Daytona if it was?
Because people still want to rock the crown.
But I'd say I disagree, man. I think there would be a super apples to apples comparison where
I don't
people
know
could
if they
say,
deliberately hold the brand back. I'm not sure about that. Genuinely not sure. But fuck, I don't know. You're really making me think.
yeah, this is where the brand just as a whole, it loses points for me, man. I've seen that kind of happen, and I've seen the response online every release. Why couldn't they make it thinner? Why couldn't they do this? And it's like, do you think the company's stupid and they don't know exactly what the client, like if they released, let's say, like if we're looking at the two of these next to each other, right? The monochrome. If they released the monochrome, made it slightly thinner, this is the Black Bay 41, or even made it, in a Black Bay 58 case, case, like, wouldn't that be a much better watch?
Yeah. I can't deny it. You're probably onto something. But I will counter in their credit by saying at least they use Tudor to be more experimental than they'll ever be with Rolex. They take chances with Tudor.
Yeah.
Right?
They do.
They do take chances. They try new things. They have more fun. And things that we would never see on a sub, innocent things like a gilt dial, you'll see it on a Tudor.
Or like a pink flamingo and a blue Tiffany chronograph.
Well, they technically did the Tiffany on the Daytona now.
Did you like my shocked face of how, oh my God, it's amazing.
But yes, like I feel like they allow themselves to be a little bit more creative, take a little bit more risk with Tudor.
You're not wrong.
Then we'll apply it later to Rolex if they see it succeeds, right? So it's almost
the new
like
Field GMT
testing ground.
Unreal to me. I love that watch so much. It's like a perfect blend of like an Explorer with that faux Tina.
Yeah.
Total strap queen, as I was talking about.
But
earlier.
same idea. Like you'll never see like faux Tina on a Rolex, but you'll see it on a Tudor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Rolex is too good for that.
On the subject of like value and value retention, I don't think there's really much to talk about additionally, besides the fact that there is a mention that you have to give credit to Rolex, nothing holds its value the way that a Rolex does. Like, period. Speaking in generalizations, when you look at the brand as a whole, with the exception of going to like extremely prestigious brands that enter you in a completely different category where you have to sell your first unborn son, your wife, or your freaking house to pay for, if you look at in the realm of more or less accessible, nothing holds its value the way that a Rolex does. But I think Tudor does a half decent job at holding its value.
You mean at retail?
Yes.
Yeah, at retail, yeah. I mean, that's just a market thing right now, right? It's like people would have been saying that about Frank Mueller at the time in the 90s when their watches were selling above retail too. Like nothing was maintaining its value. But if you spend the money on the secondary market for a Tudor versus like, if I were right now to go out and spend $15,000 on a sub, or I was out to go out on the market in US dollars and spend like $3,000 on a Tudor, I'd be more confident in a few years' time that I'd get the $3,000 back out of the Tudor than the 15 out of the sub.
Okay, so that's an interesting point.
That's the way I see it, because I don't see the Submariner being worth anywhere near 15,000, but I see the Tudor being worth more than 3,000. I see the Tudor being worth closer to its retail price than the sub is worth to its gray market price. And that translates across most Rolexes. I think Rolex retail prices are inflated. I think they're currently higher than they should be for the watch that you get.
They're definitely disproportionate to the value of the watch.
Yeah.
But I think they, in my opinion, are proportionate to the supply and demand.
Yeah, but that's business. That's a different factor. And by the way, supply and demand, like at its root, the idea of demand comes from value. Now, the perception of value on the market is just skewed by hype right now. Mm-hmm. It's skewed by the fact that Rolex is the most popular brand on earth. Everyone sees Rolex as the most prestigious brand on earth, who is not in the watch
I'm just
world.
banking on the fact that that's not going to change.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's where the argument comes in. But I, as you know, am of the position that will naturally change. Especially when it comes to things like a sub, when it comes to people waiting in line for a Pepsi. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were talking about factories before, man. They just are about to open a second full-size factory for production. And there's a reason why Tudor still gives tours of their factory, but Rolex refuses to the public. It's because it's robots making these watches, man. There's like barely any handwork actually done on these watches. They can up their production. They can double their production with the new factory, call it. They're going to be making millions of watches. Millions, right? They're going from 1 to 1.5 to producing, 3 million watches a year?
I'm just still of the opinion that there's so many people that want a Rolex, and every day there's more and more people that want one, that it'll just never change.
Let's bet a watch on it. In 5 years' time, we have this conversation again.
Well, then I better fucking use OVTLYR to be able to afford this bet. But
you better.
But anyways.
It's not going to be cheap.
So, you know what? We'll just call that point moot then and say they both genuinely have great value retention. Yeah. So, again, like in the realm of comparing Rolex to Tudor, like that's a point for Tudor. The fact that it could be spoken in the same breath of value retention as a Rolex is kind of a big deal. Let's have some fun and just talk a little bit about, like, in general, which one do we prefer and why?
In general?
Just in general. And then, like, I'd like to maybe talk about, like, answering the question on whether or not you think, like, Tudor is a great interim watch for someone until they get a Rolex. But actually, before you share your general thoughts, I wanted to ask you something on the subject of value retention. So I had this thought the other day, okay? You're walking down the street.
Every time you start with, I had this thought the other day, I'm terrified about what this story
I know,
is
I get a lot of
yield.
high thoughts. I got to be honest.
Yeah.
So this is my latest high thought. You're walking down the street. You're wearing a Rolex. Okay. By the way, this would never happen if you're wearing a Tudor. Okay. You're wearing a Rolex. You're walking down the street. Somebody stops you. Pull out a fucking knife. You're like, give me your fucking Rolex. What are you going to do?
I'm going to go into the movement history and
no, I'm serious.
Put him to sleep.
What's your
by
move?
talking about the difference between
Where does
quartz?
your head go? What's your reaction? What would you do? You're being mugged at gunpoint, at knife point for your Rolex. What do you do?
I would probably run and call the police.
Seriously?
Yeah.
That's your go-to. Turn around and run.
I like
and pray he doesn't shoot you in the back, or pray that he doesn't run after you and stab you in the back.
You know what Al Pacino said in The Irishman? He said, you run towards a gun and you run away from a knife. Something like that. I mean,
That's pretty good.
I could probably run faster than the guy with the knife. He's probably coked out. He's probably cracked
But
up.
in all seriousness, you've never had this thought? You've never entertained the idea, like, what do I do if I'm being being mugged for my watch?
Yeah, but it's like, what would I do in this? It depends on the situation. Like, if I had a Tudor, I wouldn't be like, oh, take it. It's only worth $5,000. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, fuck. I mean, I don't know. Where's this high thought? Like, if you were walking on the street with your Black Bay, you would give it. But if you were walking with the Daytona, you'd have a different reaction.
Okay, so I've thought about this, clearly.
Yeah, just go for it.
If I'm being mugged and I have my Tudor,
yeah,
I give them my Tudor. Okay?
Okay.
If they want to rob me and it's my Daytona, they really have to have a big knife. Like, very big. Like, bigger than the pocket knife that I carry. Because if not, we're going to have like a pocket knife fight in the street.
Okay. Guys, can we start making a chart of the size of a knife to the price of a watch?
But
make a ratio for it?
I'm being stupid, but I actually genuinely thought about this, okay? If somebody tried to rob me while I was wearing a Rolex, I know exactly what I would do.
Okay, go for it.
I would start laughing. And I would tell the guy, dude,
what is this fantasy that you're having right
now?
Focus. We were supposed to be talking about Rolex versus Tudor.
Focus. I would tell the guy, I would start laughing. I would tell the guy, dude, it's not real. It's a fake Rolex. It's not worth shooting me over. You can have it. And then I would hope that he would be dissuaded to not take it, thinking that I'm wearing a fake watch.
Okay. What's the next point on your fucking cheat sheet, buddy? Let's hold
on.
Okay, fucking God. I have a situation. We have a podcast where we're trying to discuss Rolex versus Tudor. We're walking down the street.
We're having a lot of fun with these stupid questions.
Hit me with another stupid question.
Okay, last one.
Go.
Do you insure your watches?
Yes.
Do you?
Yeah.
Individually? Because I realized that if you try to insure your watch, okay, so the best way to insure your watch is by basically factoring it into your house insurance. Whether you have an apartment or a house, you basically claim it under the jewelry. Most insurance policies have a default $5,000 of jewelry. If you call your insurance, you can raise that amount. I don't know if it's different in the US, but in Canada, you can raise it to a maximum, from my understanding, of $50,000. It'll make a nominal difference, a couple $100s a year increase in your policy.
Yeah.
But from my understanding, if you want to insure higher than that, you have to insure individual pieces.
Yes, that's true. And you need a proper appraisal from a registered business, whether that's a retailer or a...
So have you ever insured a piece individually?
It's different for business because you always have a rotation. So it's a different story altogether.
Because you have a business insurance policy.
So it's different.
Okay, so then you can't answer the question, because I was curious.
No, but I do know.
How much would it be to insure an individual piece? Like, if you insured a $50,000 watch as a single piece, what would the insurance be?
It's like any insurance policy, man. If you're a 20-year-old driving a Ferrari and you're reckless and you have a horrible driving record, what's your policy going to be? What's your premium going to be? You know what I mean? Like, it depends on your scenario, right? If you, insurance companies look at, ton of different factors when they value that.
What you're saying.
And I can tell you this as pure consumer advice from many of the collectors I know around the US and Canada. Most of them go with Chubb to use their insurance. Apparently they have the best structure for payouts, quickest, most seamless if there is a home robbery. There are cheaper plans and cheaper providers you could go with, but I've heard horror stories of them not wanting to pay out because this was overlooked. It's an insurance company. They're all going to do it, but I've heard that Chubb is the most reliable.
Okay, it makes sense that they're going to look at like your overall profile
safe.
as a
You're
client.
safe, by the way, as
you're
well.
Safe,
do you have a floor safe? Do you have
how many watches do you have? What are you doing with this watch? Where are you going? That makes sense.
Your lifestyle as well, right? If you're going around driving a Ferrari all day and making TikToks of you like, here I am, like in front of my favorite restaurant today, wearing a $500,000 watch and driving my 488. Come, I'll sign an autograph for you, whatever. It's like, they're going to be like, you fucking deserve to have your home invaded.
Fair enough. Okay, so back to my original question then. Do you think Tudor's a good interim watch until you get a Rolex?
I think so. I think so. And I just like when you asked that question originally, I said it kind of devalues the brand to say it's an interim watch, because I think you could be totally happy, and I have been totally happy with Tudors in my collection in the past. I like to separate it from Rolex. Rolex leaves such a negative taste in my mouth these days. It really does, that I like to keep Tudor separate and say, let me look at it as a watch. Let me not try and tie it to Rolex and say, oh, but it's produced by Rolex, so it has like some of the same hype, or like try to do any of that sort of mind freaking.
Right.
To me, to say it's an interim watch is short selling the product. I think they make unbelievable watches. The one gripe that I have in it, again, to summarize my points this whole video, is the fact that I feel like because of the fucking Rolex link, they hold themselves back as a standalone brand. I think if Tudor went independent one day, totally independent, and was like managed, well, let's call it like managed by Swatch Group, I think that they could do some incredible things with that brand. That would be my answer to it. But yes, it is a good interim. If you really want a Submariner, but you've only got $5,000 to spend, I'd say go for this. Don't buy a fucking two-tone vintage Datejust.
Right.
And say, I got a Rolex.
Would you tell people to get it as in the interim, or would you just be like, nah, save up, get the Rolex?
Usually the saving up method's better because you're going to retain your money better.
Yeah, get what you want.
But it depends on the time frame too. Like if you want to, say, I'll probably buy the Tudor this year and then sell it next year, you'll probably get your money back.
Right.
So
I think for me, the watches serve completely different purposes. If somebody asked me, should I buy a Rolex or should I buy a Tudor, or should I get a Tudor as an interim watch? My answer would be, what do you hope to accomplish by acquiring the watch? If you are out to buy a statement, if you're trying to wear a sense of occasion, if you want every time you look at the watch to quote unquote feel like a king, there's no substitute for the Rolex. The Rolex basically tells a story of your success to yourself and to others. If you wear a Rolex, everyone perceives you as someone who's made it. And if you save up and you get the Rolex that you've always had your heart on, you will genuinely feel a sense of occasion when you put it on your wrist. So it doesn't serve the same purpose. If you buy a Tudor, in my mind, you're buying a genuinely very good timepiece. Amazing quality, amazing design, good history, just overall fantastic value. Wear that thing to the beach, wear it into the ocean, whack it onto a door sill. It'll survive anything. It'll last you your entire lifetime. You'll hand it to your kid. It'll last their lifetime. Hand it to their kid. It'll last their lifetime. It's a watch for life. But it doesn't do the same thing. It doesn't serve the same purpose. And now, as someone who's fortunate enough to afford both, that's exactly what they do now. When I wear my Tudor, I'm looking for a nice watch that shows that I know about watches, that I have good taste, that matches my outfit, that I can beat up. It looks fantastic. No matter what I'm wearing, no matter what I'm doing, it'll survive anything. But when I put on my Rolex, it's a completely different thing. It's just serving a completely different purpose.
Well, I'll tell you what, my heart on is definitely more for Patek. That's what I would see as the better sort of like walk around, feel like a king. That's the watch for me that I would say would accomplish that and feel like a success more, or something like Vacheron, something higher. But that's totally personal.
I don't disagree.
On another hand, though,
I don't want to interrupt you because I like where you're going with this. But I just want to say you're talking about a completely different category now. Like
I don't think I am.
I do okay for myself.
Yeah.
Owning a Patek is like not even in the cards for me. Like, unless OVTLYR makes me a shit ton of money, unless this podcast takes off and I have Lamborghini money, I'll never be in the...
You would be surprised. You would be surprised. The majority of Pateks sell under retail, some selling for like 70, 60% off. Okay, so you would be shocked at the value that you could get from Pateks or from other brands that you might never have considered. I'll give you a good example. Panda right now in the market is like 35 US for the new reference, 36 US, something like that. Call it 50K Canadian. For 50K Canadian, what could you get in Patek? You could actually get a ton of really, really stunning hand finished watches from one of the greatest manufacturers. And in fact, I quoted like 2 Pateks this week for under that $50K price point. So if you already have that money to spend, if you sold your Panda and something else, for example, you have 2 Daytonas, you have multiple Daytonas actually. If you were to sell 2 of them, you could afford the majority of really nice higher end dress watches. And there are some dressier watches from Patek, the classier watches, the watches that are true to their form, which are super reasonable in price.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. One of my favorites is a 5235
For me,
R.
It's still a little bit different because the Patek that I would want to buy,
okay, but you're talking, but then you're going Nautilus.
No, 100%. But also like a dress watch, Patek is not something that I'm going to feel comfortable wearing with jeans. Like it's just not going to fit my style particularly well. But I understand the point you're trying to make. And I just don't think it dissuades from the argument that I'm making, which is, again, different purposes, right? Like if you want a Rolex, you're chasing status, you're chasing hype, you want the recognition, whether it's for yourself when you look at it or for someone else. The point is that you're looking for something. You're looking for some sort of a validation wearing that piece. It becomes more than just the sum of its parts. It becomes really just like, what is that brand grown to represent? Whether it's a Patek or a Rolex, it's the same notion. Someone that's in the market to buy a Patek is not someone that's in the market to just buy a really good, reliable watch, right? It's not the same anymore.
I've been thinking like, what is it that you remind me of when you go on the super Rolex dick sucking train? And then it clicked in my head. You remind me of Jared from Subway. You remind me of an era where corporations would like buy people to like follow the marketing, but it was based on people who were just who like fell into the marketing trap, got consumed by it, and then they just threw money at them. So I'm convinced now that you are owned by Rolex. I'm convinced that they are sending you a check because some of the stuff that you say about how like it makes you feel and stuff, it's like, it's poetry. It's beautiful. But it's like, dude, this is a fucking watch brand that makes billions off people falling for that.
First of all, I'm not alone in this.
Yeah, that's my point.
Like,
yeah, 100%.
Everyone.
It's cultivated, man.
It is. Rolex is a fucking cult. But as its cult leader,
you're the self-proclaimed cult leader.
Apparently, if that's the fucking, if you're gonna
all
put
hail
me down,
Jared from Subway.
Listen, if you're gonna label me as such, then as the fucking cult leader, I will say that genuinely, my genuine consumer advice, and we could end on this, my genuine consumer advice is, if you're in the market for a really good watch, you should probably convince yourself to buy a Tudor. Genuinely. You will save some money. You will walk away with just as good of a watch. No one will mug you for your watch. You could travel with it.
You never know.
You never know. But chances are,
they make a Jubilee bracelet. Like it's a recognizable.
You're ruining my point.
Yeah, I know.
You're ruining my point.
Okay.
The point is, it's a lot less likely that you get mugged with a Tudor than a Rolex. You're going to be a lot less nervous to wear it, to scratch it, to enjoy it.
I think both are great watches. And I'd like to end this segment by saying, when I called you Jared from Subway, I did not want to bear any relevance to his personal life or litigation troubles. I just meant in a corporate sense of you being a spokesperson for a brand that was like telling personal anecdotes and then got thrown into the midst of like a huge corporate funding train. So thanks for watching, guys. Chris is a good guy.